The atmosphere of Texas, and more specifically, the Piney Woods region in East Texas, is nothing but significant to my story. Not a small-town child. I grew up in Houston, wrought from the urban jungle and the rush of city life. It was during those tender preteen years when my affinity for camping and nature exploration was born, a complete 180 from my accustomed city scene. My best friend Vincent and I were eager perpetrators of outdoor escapades, taking refuge in mutual adoration and childish awe of Mother Nature. And so came that monumental day when we decided it was finally time to embark on our much-anticipated camping trip to the Piney Woods. Imagine a brisk fall day in 1992. The Texas sun was taking a breather, and the evergreen trees of the Piney Woods towered over us as though we were uninvited guests in their world. We scooted along the lichen-strewn trails, speaking our secret language of childhood camaraderie, chirping of the different rock types we discovered, the oddly shaped footprints that were definitely direwolf footprints, the cawing of jays echoing through the woods. Oh, such an adventure it was. On our second day in these dense woods, we had come across a low creek that a makeshift plank bridge just wide enough for us to cross. The smell hit us first, a unique blend of aging leaves and something else, something unfamiliar, yet daunting. The almost vinegar-like stench was hard to place but was powerful enough to make our stomachs churn. Vincent even made a joke about it, saying it was a witch's potion brewing nearby. He was quite the joker, which made the events that unfolded later that day even more startling since I had never seen him so out of character. As we crossed the makeshift bridge, looking forward to the prospects of catching a tadpole or two, my buddy Vince suddenly turned around and pointed towards the bushes at the edge of the clearing we had crossed. He had a curious and slightly concerned look on his face that I hadn't seen before. At his indication, I turned to look, and what I saw hit me like a deer in the headlights. Less than 50 yards out, peeking out from the edge of the clearing, was a creature I couldn't quite put a label on. It was a massive figure, darker than the darkest night, with copious amounts of hair springing out, completely draped in it. Huddled by a giant oak, it seemed to be fidgeting with the ground, emitting guttural sounds that resonated with the forlorn symphony of the woods. The sheer breadth and width of this being were incredible. It looked like a mountain man combined with a gorilla, and it was right there in the wilderness of Texas. It appeared preoccupied, seemingly unaware of our tiny, wide-eyed, slack-jawed forms frozen on the bridge. Seeing it up close, it became clear that this was no man in a costume. It had a wildness, a brute force about it that sent a bolt of fear straight through my heart. We stood frozen for what seemed like eternity, heartbeats echoing in our ears louder than the gushing of the creek nearby. Fun adventures had taken a gut-wrenching turn, and we were the star actors. Without a word, and without breaking our gaze from the creature, we slowly turned around and bolted back towards our camp. Brushing past bushes and jumping over stones, we finally found ourselves at the break of the woods, panting and lost in confusion and terror. Vincent was the first to speak, his voice shaky but determined. His parting words before running home were, "Don't ever speak about this. No one will believe us." This encounter with the eerie, ape-like creature was the trigger that halted our boyish adventures into the woods. It cast a dark shadow over my love for the wilderness, making it difficult for me to venture again. Fast forward now, into adulthood, I find myself an armchair enthusiast of the crypto world, exploring countless animal anomalies and their possible existence. And yet, the memory of that experience stays fresh, a constant reminder of the unknown that lurks within the shadows of our reality. This was my first introduction to the concept of Bigfoot, or perhaps in Texas, the swamp ape or southern Sasquatch, keepers of the mysterious wilderness. My wish in sharing this story isn't so much a call to convince you of what I saw one crisp day in the Texas piney woods, but to keep the spirit of discovery and belief in possibilities alive. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, sightings, and shared experiences, for it's those that make our search for these elusive creatures worthwhile. It's not just about the end game, but the journey too. Every story, every encounter leading us through the maze of the unknown. When I was just a knee-high 8-year-old, I would bolt around our ranch back in Texas, surrounded by the fantastic vista of Sam Houston National Forest. I was in awe of the idiosyncrasies of the wildlife, from the dark dappled doe to the red-crested woodpecker. You see, I've loved nature since I was a squalling baby. It was as if the universe had poured all its wonder and beauty into this tiny patch of Texas, just for me. Fast forward to my teenage years, when other kids were ogling over car magazines and comics, I was elbow deep in books about bird identification and wildlife behavior. Heck, I was probably the only 14-year-old lad in Polk County who could distinguish a Carolina chickadee call from a tufted titmouse. Fast forward a bit. One late spring afternoon in 1998, my buddy Jack and I decided to embark on an ambitious hike along the Trinity River, which snakes through the woods in the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area and eventually merges with the waters of Lake Livingston. Now remember, Jack and I were born explorers, wilderness wanderers, if you will, with a taste for adventure that most teenagers don't possess. En route, we were joking and yapping, all while keeping an eye out for interesting rock formations. Anyone would have thought we were on a noble quest, the way we set off with such enthusiasm. The afternoon sun hung high as we passed the McComas Bluff Preserve, every so often a mild gust of wind ushering a whiff of something putrid, foul, akin to rotten eggs mixed with muddy water. Being the nature enthusiasts we were, our first thought was a dead animal in its final stages of decomposition. Little did we know what this seemingly regular day held for us. Now, as we ventured deeper into the woods and neared the Great Trinity Forest Gateway Park, an off-putting smell intensified. It's hard to explain, but it was like the olfactory equivalent of hearing nails on a chalkboard. And at about the time we reached the bridge over 5 Mile Creek, Jack froze. His next movement was abrupt. It seemed as though he wanted to point out some incredible hidden treasure. To my astonishment, it wasn't gold or diamonds he was pointing at. Approximately 30 feet below us, just where the creek waters started lapping the edges, was a monstrous creature. Its hirsute shoulders presented an eerie picture as massive as a professional weightlifter's, dwarfing its head that was seemingly puny in comparison. Picture a linebacker in a full uniform, but underneath that was skin and dark brown hair, not padding. Its behavior seemed peculiar. This mysterious behemoth was crouching by the bank of the creek. Its gaze was fixed into the glistening water, its burly body eerily still. You'd think such a creature would have caused ripples or splashes in the water, but none were evident. Stupefied, we managed to keep our eyes on the creature below for perhaps no more than 10 seconds. Then Jack bolted, running east away from the bridge with the urgency of someone evading a predator. Stunned, I quickly recovered, my heartbeat booming in my ears like a drum as I traced his steps. Once we were finally safe at Jack's place, he sprinted to his room and locked himself in. The whole episode had him pretty shook up. Disturbed and feeling a bit isolated myself, I phoned my dad for a lift back to our ranch bordering Lake Livingston. An indescribable feeling washed over me on the way back. It wasn't exactly fear or anxiety, more like an electric shock, jolting my brain to replay what I'd witnessed. Regrettably, the whole ordeal led Jack and I to casually drift apart. The price we paid for an unsolicited rendezvous with a creature from a realm unknown. Curiosity turned to an obsession as I relentlessly searched libraries to understand the identity of the creekside creature that looked suspiciously like a colossal ape. Fast forward to now, and I'm aware of the phenomenon of Bigfoot. Until that day, it was just an old wives' tale told to misbehaving kids. Could it have been the legendary Bigfoot in the flesh? Or was it some misidentified creature of the Wild West? Well, that uncertainty, my friends, still lingers. Before I end my tale, let me add a mini-tale from my family archives. Many moons ago, when my great-grandmother was about 70 years old, she reminisced about her youth. Living on the edge of the Sabine National Forest at East Texas, she'd had her remarkable encounter. As a young girl, she spotted not one but 5 similar creatures near Caddo Lake. Overwhelmed, she dashed back home, and soon the whole family was observing these unusual beings swimming across to Goat Island. These strange creatures were unclothed, covered head to toe in hair, with 3 evidently larger than their 2 companions. Her family took it as a bad omen, forbidden from leaving their yard for many weeks after the encounter. You might be wondering, why didn't the creature sightings make headlines? You see, my great-grandparents were French immigrants, and they feared the ridicule and mockery that would surely follow. The incident was kept hushed, their observation closeted away from the world, until an old woman decided to reveal her encounter, leaving us all stunned and curious. Even my great-grandfather, who'd shared decades of marriage, was taken aback by the revelation. Join me in 1993 now. I was mostly roaming around the Brazos Bend State Park, gawking at alligators and birdwatching. During one such outing with my brother Edward, we were on a trail skirting Elm Lake, a popular destination for birdwatchers. We weren't alone. Another figure was some distance away, standing unusually tall against the backdrop of moss-draped oaks. It didn't take us long to start speculating. Probably another birdwatcher, or maybe an unusually tall man doing some solitary soul-searching. Our speculation took an uncanny turn when the figure seemed to mimic human actions. I clearly recall it bending over to pick up a rock and heaving it into the lake in an underhanded toss. At this point, we concluded it was a man because what else could it be? It made us feel safe, because we had a long walk back to our camp and the alternative was just uncomfortably creepy. How convenient of our human brains to find comfort in familiar patterns. Fast forward to a few days later when we finally got around to discussing it with our cousin Emma. We labeled it our Bigfoot story, sort of laughing it off. But her question made us revisit our assumptions. Why couldn't a Bigfoot throw rocks? That hit us harder than we'd care to admit. We realized we'd rushed into labeling the creature as a human, discarding the possibility of it being something else. Perhaps something extraordinary. So folks, that's a snapshot of my life. A Texan kid with an unusual penchant for the wild who happened to cross paths with mysterious creatures. Even if these occurrences sound extraordinary, I reckon it lends some weight to the existence of, well, Bigfoot perhaps? In the end, I guess we ought to keep in mind that just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Whether we call them Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or just a trick of the mind, experiences like these surely give us some food for thought. As we say in Texas, don't hang your hat higher than you can reach. Stay adventurous, folks, and remember, even when you think you're alone in the wild, there may be an extra pair of eyes watching you. Adios, for now, and keep enjoying those bizarre tales that nature throws at us once in a while. Let me start by delving deep into some backstory so that I can provide you with a comprehensive setup. It all goes back to the summer of 1982 when I was stationed at Lackland AFB near San Antonio, Texas. Just a young buck at the time, I was training to be part of the aircraft maintenance team and wasn't really bothered by anything. However, my outlook on things changed drastically post my strange encounter, and now I wholeheartedly believe in the unknown. After an intensely exhausting day of training, I decided to take a break and venture out into the wilderness. Texas has some fabulous fishing spots, and so my mates and I packed up for a trip to Lake Whitney. It was my first time visiting this place, but I'd heard about Lake Whitney's deep, clear waters and attractive fish hives. We ended up camping near Tawash Creek, a popular angling spot known for its peaceful atmosphere. My mates and I had set up camp by this creek and planned to spend the whole weekend fishing and unwinding. On the first night, we had a BBQ going with fresh fish, and the scent was wafting across the area. If you love the open wilderness like I do, you'd understand this sentiment. The tranquility of nature mixed with the smell of fresh fish roasting on an open fire. It was simply pure bliss. As the night progressed, however, something felt awfully strange. It wasn't dread or apprehension, rather, it was more of a bizarre sense of anticipation, like something was about to happen. It was indeed so still that day. You could almost hear a pin drop. Even our regular midnight hoots of the owls were oddly missing. The quietness in retrospect was disquieting, enough to make your blood run cold. As we were sitting by the fire, there was this peculiar musty odor that started to linger around our campsite. It wasn't the regular earthly fragrance of outdoors, woods, or even our grilled fish. This was different, somewhat stinking, and strangely animalistic, like nothing we had ever smelled before. As the night wore on, the odor seemed to intensify, and we attributed it to some boggy, decaying plant matter nearby. In hindsight, that was our first sign of the extraordinary sighting yet to come. As strange as it may sound, next, we observed this massive spoon and fork we had neatly packed in our truck were mysteriously misplaced on the ground, just out of sight. It was quite heavy duty, meant for serving up sizable fish at our outdoor barbecues, and it was difficult to believe that any animal that would move such heavy cutlery. Even though we were rather puzzled by these occurrences, we shrugged it off and thought it was merely some curious raccoon or another small mammal. However, all these misunderstandings were cleared the following morning when we stumbled upon a peculiar set of tracks. These were massive and had a peculiar shape, about 20 inches in length, far from anything I'd ever seen before. The stride was long too, almost as if whatever made these prints propelled itself forward with a force unseen in regular critters. That day we packed up in a hurry and cut short our trip. The peculiar odor, the unaccountable, unsettling silence, the mysteriously moved cutlery, and above all, those giant, deep imprints. Everything added up and pointed out to something, which was far from normal. Even though I couldn't, for the life of me, believe it, but all signs were screaming Bigfoot. An experience like that does give you the jitters, like electricity pulsing through your brain and sending you into a kind of a disbelief shock. So over the years, as I frequented more such angling and camping trips all over Texas, from the Guadalupe River to Toledo Bend, I saw more traces of the so-called Bigfoot. Bent saplings, unusual cries in the wilderness, and traces of what seemed like non-human, unkempt fur. In conclusion, I'm fairly convinced that there's more to our world than regular people ever realize or accept. Whether it's Bigfoot or another extraordinary creature, something is out there in the wilderness, carefully treading the ground we fear to explore. In the heat of the Texan summer of 1997, I was just about 17 years old, a few months shy of my high school graduation. My buddies, Matt and Alex, and I had managed to get our hands on a bootleg bottle of Tej, a local orange honey wine brewed out here. As we were minors and familiar faces to the local constabulary, we needed a clandestine place to imbibe without inviting any unwanted attention. After some deliberation, we decided to drive north from Snyder to a hidden logging trail just past the intersection of U.S. Route 84 and State Highway 208, a secluded spot known to us thanks to countless camping trips during our Boy Scout days. Dividing the bottle between the three of us, it wasn't quite enough to get us utterly smashed, but certainly loosened us up a bit. As the last stint of the day's light faded into a classic starry Texas night sky, we embarked on our return journey to town. It was roughly around 10:15 p.m., and the reprieve from the summer heat had the countryside unfold in an uncharted charm. When we were cruising down State Highway 84, our vehicle daring the unlit roads, our journey was interrupted by an unwelcome sight. As we rounded a gentle bend driving about 40 miles, the pickup's headlights shone on a massive tenebrous creature on the rightmost lane. This hulking creature was huddled over, as if feasting on an unidentifiable roadkill. As the glow of our headlights enveloped it, the creature stirred from its crouched position. It turned to face us, showing its broadside. And then, in a move that still gives me goosebumps to this day, the creature sprang onto its hind legs and with two giant strides, vanished into the wilderness lining the road. What we saw standing there, illuminated by our vehicle's headlights, was a colossal creature, easily standing at 7 to 8 feet tall. It was wrapped head to toe in a vast expanse of glossy black fur. But the strangest part was its face, or what we could discern from it. It wasn't the widespread snout of a bear as one could anticipate from the figure of the creature, but a flat, gorilla-like face void of any fur. At that moment, shrouded in silence and fear, all three of us yelped in a panic. Not our proudest moment, I must admit. We pressed the pedal to the metal and scooted presumably faster than we ever had. That night we spoke little about the incident as we continued our drive in shocked silence. I remember questioning whether we should notify the proper authorities. The mere possibility of getting into trouble over the bootlegged alcohol silenced us, and it was unanimously decided to drop any ideas of alerting anyone. That unfortunate sighting, even after all these years, remains a secret shared only amongst my friends and me. It wasn't until quite recently, when I noticed Fox News broadcasting about your organization's investigation into oddities in Lubbock, Texas, that I finally felt the urge to discuss this buried secret. Your website seems like a place I can finally share our mysterious encounter all those years ago. I'm thankful for this chance to finally get it off my chest. Appreciate your time in reading this. First off, I'm writing you this message all the way from Marshall, Texas. Now, this isn't exactly the typical abode of your run-of-the-mill creature of fantasy, but back when I was just a young guy, I caught sight of something that stuck with me until now. I'm not talking about some vague, half-remembered image that one might discount as a trick of the light or a misfiring neuron. No, this was as real as the keyboard I'm typing on right now. It was a searing afternoon, the kind only Texas summers can throw at you. I was barely 12 back then, but already had a knack for exploring, poking my nose where it didn't necessarily belong. Whether it was the thick bushes that lined our backyard, or the dense woods that stretched for what seemed like eternity, I was the perennial, albeit unofficial, Indiana Jones. This fateful day, the woods had my attention. Round about the intersection of Garrison Avenue and West Houston Street, there's this old shanty path that leads into those woods. It wasn't exactly an inviting trail, but she had the charm of a beautiful dame on a film noir poster. Resistance, as they say, was futile. Equipped with my trusty rucksack and an overabundance of excitement, I set out. As I ventured deeper, that's when I noticed it. There, standing just shy of the tree line, was something that both intrigued and frightened me. A dark figure, just watching. Not aggressive in its stance, but certainly wary, like a boxer sizing up his opponent. This creature was taller than any man, burly and covered in hair fit for a bear, but moving with the grace of a panther. I stopped in my tracks, and a wave of sheer terror washed over me. Even to this day, I could still feel that odd, sickly, stone-cold sensation that engulfed me at that moment. The adrenaline was pumping so hard that even my heart felt like it was knocking a warning on my ribcage. Coming back to the present, it's the unmistakable feeling of innocence lost that I remember the most. When you're that young, your world is all sunshine and roses until something knocks your worldview right off its axis. A few years later, while watching a documentary, I couldn't help but draw parallels to the eerie tales the folk narrated about Sasquatch and what I had experienced that afternoon. Fast forward to a few nights later, curled up in my bed trying earnestly to lose myself in a book when life decided to throw me another curveball. My window screen, which was locked securely, came crashing in. It happened in such a twinkling that my mind was still processing the noise when my eyes caught sight of the intruder. A large, hairy arm reaching into my room. It wasn't just the absurdity of the situation that clamped a heavy knot in my stomach, but also the sheer familiarity of it. Though fear was nipping at my heels, I somehow managed to get out of my precariously situated position and dashed off to wake my father sleeping blissfully unaware in his room. To his credit, upon being roused and seeing my agitated state paired with the strange sight of the window screen resting bizarrely on the bedroom floor, he got up to investigate, but found no trace of any nocturnal visitors, except for a lingering musky scent. Unusual, but not entirely alarming. Years later, as I headed to college in Lubbock and began to delve into anthropology, that incident from my childhood still haunted me. I found myself reading everything I could about Bigfoot and similar cryptids. What was once a macabre childhood memory became a full-blown obsession. The more I discovered, the more I realized my encounter was not one of a kind. Now you might wonder why I didn't talk about this before, or why I took it upon myself to go this deep into the subject. To you, I say this. It is not often one gets to encounter the inexplicable and live to tell the tale. It alters you in a way nothing else can. Leaves a mark on your psyche that shapes who you are. Thanks for reading my rambling and taking the time to walk down memory lane with me. I don't know if my experience would make any difference, but I felt it was important for someone else to hear my tale. A child's fearful imagination, or a true encounter with an elusive cryptid. I can't definitively say. All I can do is share my story and let the listener decide. On a closing note, I encourage others with similar encounters not to shy away but rather to share. With so many incredible technologies at our fingertips, we have a unique opportunity to offer insight and perhaps further our understanding of our cohabitants on this planet. Who knows what we'll unlock? Until then, keep exploring, stay curious, and as always, keep an open mind. I lived in the heart of Texas, deep into the county of Medina, around the outskirts of Hondo. Known for its beautiful landscapes filled with wildflowers and the serene atmosphere, it was a haven for nature lovers like me. However, unknown to many, the tranquility of this fairy tale setting hides tales of uncanny experiences and eerie occurrences. My journey starts approximately 2 years ago, from the humble beginnings of my picturesque ranch house settled alongside Secco Creek. This story starts on November 15th, opening day of the firearm deer season. It was about 8 a.m., and it was already pretty warm for a November morning. Now, I have a deer stand a good 1.5 miles from where my father positions himself during hunting season. Deer hunting is our bonding ritual, but that morning was about to turn into an unforgettable experience. The silence, a typical facet of early morning woodlands, blanketed the area as the day began. The tranquility was disturbed only by an unusual smell. It was a bit earthy and potent, similar to damp soil mixed with rotting foliage. Then out of nowhere, a strange howling echoed in the woods. One, then another, sending waves of goosebumps over my skin. It sounded eerily similar to a woman screaming, yet there was an inhuman quality to it. After the second echo, the musty smell disappeared, replaced by a contradictory calmness. Although unnerving, my curiosity kept me in the stand, making mental notes of the encounter. While discussing the morning's events over lunch, my father brought up the strange sounds he'd heard. I was surprised, yet relieved to hear him describe the same. A silent agreement was made that we'd keep our ears open during the second half of the day. However, with no recurrence of the sounds or smell, the day ended on an anticlimactic note. The next morning, my brother, roughly 3 miles away, confirmed hearing the same strange shrieks bleaching into the silence of dawn. As with us, there wasn't any further evidence of the occurrence. A few years prior to this, during a bit of leisure time with my younger brother, we found ourselves wandering through a maze of trails around our cabin. A wrong turn had us a bit lost, and we decided to head towards FM 462, the main road. Scanning both sides to figure out our bearings, a sight that lingers in my memory stopped me in my tracks. My brother was the first to notice the towering figure of a man, seemingly cloaked in shadow, standing at an uncomfortable distance. Upon closer look, I noticed the figure outlined by an uncanny, fuzzy-like aura. Describing it as eerie would be an understatement. Recalling these later, images of the mythical Dogman of Michigan from Monster Quest floated into my mind. My brother, until today, hasn't forgotten the unnerving encounter. Thinking back, I recall one peculiar incident when my wife woke up around 4:30 a.m., startled by a rhythmic knocking sound, like someone striking a tree trunk. 7 knocks to be exact. Fairly groggy, I missed the actual event, but the recollection by my wife intrigued me. The very next day, we found your website and were amazed at the similarity of our experiences. This took me back to an incident back in 2013, where unfamiliar growls reverberated through the otherwise peaceful woods. At first, I thought it was a bear, but we've never had bears around Hondo. Around the same time, an unfamiliar odor wafted in through our bedroom window in the middle of the night. It was pungent and hard-hitting, initially mistaken for a skunk. Yet it differed from any skunk odor we'd ever come across. Research has turned up accounts of the East Fouch RD incident, which surprisingly resonates with ours. Now I have strong reasons to believe that we fall into the category of folks who may have had a Bigfoot encounter. It's strange, yet intriguing, to think that the peace and beauty of our hometown hide such unexplainable phenomenon. So there you have it. My story detailing the strange occurrences we've encountered over the years tucked away in our quiet corner of Texas. While we have no answers to offer, hopefully, our experience can add to the collective knowledge about these extraordinary incidents. Looking forward to hearing thoughts and insights. After all, we aren't alone in these encounters. Keep up the good work. Until the next anomaly surfaces, enjoy the great Texas outdoors. As a Texas native, I've been no stranger to wild stories and offbeat tales, but what I'm about to share with you is unlike anything I've experienced heretofore. I live in a small, sleepy town called Port Lavaca along the Gulf Coast. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. Life here has always been quaint, quiet, and honestly a bit mundane, until one peculiar incident that still boggles my mind. Allow me to set the scene for you. I gotta tell you, the Texan moon has a certain charm that I haven't found anywhere else. On the night of our strange encounter, it was just me, my cousin Ricky, and our trusty old mutt Max. We were at the Matagorda Bay Nature Park, a place we've been to countless times for camping. It was a clear, starry Texas night, the kind where the silence is broken only by the distant hooting of a lone owl or the rustling leaves. Yet that night, the tranquility was disrupted by an eerie presence. Right around midnight, as we sat around the campfire, we heard a peculiar set of sounds. It was a low grunting, like something we've never heard before, followed by thuds, almost like something heavy bounded off the ground. Instinctively, Ricky and I felt our hearts pumping like a freight train. We exchanged glances, a tacit understanding passing between us. Now I'm not one to scare easily, but this unnatural noise sure was unsettling. We hurriedly gathered Max, swiftly moved into our camper, and stayed put, frozen in apprehension. In the morning, resolute and slightly reassured by the sun's comforting rays, we decided to inspect the area. We found the bushes nearby were inexplicably flattened. Our eyes were drawn to what appeared as an unusual heel print. It was unlike any we've seen before, quite peculiar in shape. I managed to click a couple of photos before the sinking feeling of uncertainty overwhelmed us. Making light of the situation, we decided to venture back to that spot at night. Call it bravery or pure stupidity, but we were intrigued. Resultantly, we decided on a peculiar way to communicate. We decided to knock on the tree trunks, 2 and 3 knocks in a rhythm, none of us knowing what outcome to expect. The silence of the night was abruptly shattered when we heard a distinct knock back, much like a perfectly timed baseball swing. I got to tell you, it nearly froze my blood in my veins. We didn't need more signs to know that we were not alone in those woods. Taking it a step beyond, we decided to howl. I'm still not sure why we did it, but strange times call for stranger actions, right? As the echo of our howls receded, replaced by an unexpected rustling in the distance, and what seemed to be the plopping sound of something dropping into the nearby creek, I conceded that we had indeed stirred up something unusual. In the days that followed, the experience became the talk of the town, with several local folks pitching in with their own similar tales. Our encounter reinvigorated the atmosphere of our sleepy town with spark of mystery. In the wise words of a Texan legend, life can sometimes be stranger than fiction. It's occurrences like these that make me stand by these words. I guess we never truly know what hides behind the thick curtains of familiar landscapes and unpretentious creek beds. Keep your antennas tuned, friends. There's always more to uncover in the Lone Star State. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring. This head-scratching experience pertains to me and my mate, Tyler, a guy who possesses a sturdy rationality, but was still left flabbergasted by the events that we've encountered in the Texan backcountry. For some context, we both live and work in Texas, around the regions of Old Dime Box and Caldwell, if you're familiar. Just last week, right when the dusk was starting to settle on an unusually eerie September night, on September 2nd to be exact, we were at my homestead, nestled in a quiet corner of Lee County, approximately 12 miles southeast of Giddings. We were on the porch, stretched out, sharing cowboy wisdom, losing ourselves to the slow rhythm of the swaying wind chimes as the sun started drowning down the horizon. That's when we first heard it. A peculiar grunting sound, much like a strangled exhalation, that seemed to come from the cluster of dense shrubs that peppered the end of my property. The eerily unfamiliar sound sent a jolt of goosebumps across my skin. We exchanged puzzled glances, and then quickly darted back inside, the pulse pounding strong in our throats. Bright morning of September 3rd, with sheer curiosity shining bright in our eyes, we decided to inspect the source of last night's uncanny occurrence. Upon reaching the spot, we found bushes pressed down, giving the distinct impression of a heavy entity having passed through. What caught our eyes, however, was this distinct indentation on the ground, a heel mark pattern that bore a striking resemblance to footprints. Unable to resist, we clicked plenty of photos, just in case we decided to investigate further. Fast forward to that night. Armed with a glimmering courage and a heightened sense of uneasiness, we decided to venture back into those woods, trying to draw out whatever concealed entity that was hiding in the wilderness. We started with wood knocks, a simple pattern of 2 and 3 hits spread over 5 sets. As if in response to our summons, it echoed back. What we heard was a distinct wood knock, eerily similar to the resonating ring when a baseball player makes a solid swing. Driven by half fear and half curiosity, we kept knocking and even tried to howl, hoping the creature or entity would show itself. The response we received was a series of thuds, mimicking the sound of a heavy object dropping on the ground. The woods seemed to wake up with a stir of movement, and the gurgle of running water suggested something moved through the stream nearby. One could argue that it might have been an animal, but if you've been in Texas long enough, you pretty much get accustomed to the region's faunal symphony. This wasn't one of them. Interestingly, it wasn't my first brush with the unknown. The very next day, my husband and I were driving back from a friend's house in Caldwell after sealing a car deal. We were heading south on M156, our son tucked neatly into the back seat. As we reached the spot flanked by guardrails, a tall, looming figure suddenly materialized right in front of our car. It was covered in a knit of darkness, walking on two legs and dashed off towards the east at a startling pace. Stunned, we came to an abrupt stop, thinking about how we narrowly missed hitting it. Our minds were racing, trying to fathom what we'd just seen yet not finding any logical explanation. There's no real description to pin it down. It was tall, carried itself on two legs, shot through darkness, and was mysteriously fast. In all my years of living, I have never had an encounter quite like this one. I wish we had the guts to investigate then and there, but the bewilderment and fear had us tight in its grip. And by golly, it was far from over. Back when I was a college sophomore, I remember this one time sharing a ride back to my Jackson Community College dorm in Clark Lake with my brother-in-law after visiting my folks at home in Adrian. Cruising west on M50 near the Jackson County border, we suddenly saw a large bipedal creature dash out from the passenger side, cross in front of us, and disappear into the woods. It moved with an unimaginable speed and grace. Seems like a lifetime ago, but the memory is as fresh as the dew on a crisp Texan morning. The experience was so intense and bewildering that I hesitated to talk about it unless my brother-in-law acknowledged it first. Did we witness something supernatural, or just a figment of our overworked, college-stressed brains? Your guess is as good as mine. That's it, I guess. You may think I'm one cheese short of a pizza, but these stories are as real as the Texan sun, true as the country roads and as mysterious as the lunar eclipse. I hope you find something interesting to feast on from my bewildering accounts. Good luck and Godspeed.